that one. I need something else.
You need to get rid
Just
of
like
it. You need to get rid of it. Otherwise,
Did
it'd be
you
some
some
fire.
April, huh? That's not that far away.
It's not, that's why I
Are you
said that.
excited? No?
I know.
Ready for it? Hi, yeah, David. No, okay. Oh, okay,
past the lady signing desk, and she wouldn't get it, she didn't have many copies for it. Yeah, and then the recording might be available till sometime after all these are done. Well, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, the lady signing desk, you know what, you can take it.
Good morning. This is the time and place set for the first workshop in the Public Utilities Commissions of Nevada's investigatory workshop into the Energy Choice Initiative and docket number 17-10001. My name is Joe Reynolds, and I'm the chairman of the commission and the presiding officer over this matter. And please forgive me, everyone, this morning. I am battling a little bit of a cold, and so my voice may sound like I'm battling a cold. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. And as I mentioned during our pre-hearing meeting last week, it's my intention this morning to have a discussion, to have a dialogue into what does this constitutional amendment mean. And I think we need to look at what it means in order to answer the follow-up question is, what amendments or repeals to any current Nevada laws, policies, and existing energy programs may be necessary pursuant to this constitutional provision in order to achieve the purpose of it. Nothing should be read too much into my questions on either side. It's my intent to have an objective, impartial discussion about this proposed amendment. I'm not here to endorse it or to oppose it in any way, but what I do want to try to do is to understand it better. And in order to do that, I have to ask questions and to flesh that out on the record. And so that's the purpose of my questioning here today. And so again, I'd ask anyone not to read anything too much into tough questions. As I said last week, it's my intent to roll up our sleeves and dig into this in a way that the legislature might not be able to, the governor's Committee on Energy Choice might not be able to. I've set aside the next 2 weeks to look into the different topics regarding this issue. And in order to do that, I need participation. As I said, I need help. And so there's 3 open microphones for folks in Carson City, as well as 3 open microphones for folks in Las Vegas. And what I'm looking for is answers. I do have a court reporter here who's transcribing the conversation for purpose of the public record. Something that we are also able to do is, for the first time, is we are going to be storing and making available to the public these workshops by video. We've never done that before at the Public Utilities Commission, but we're going to do that here for these dockets because we do believe that these workshops are important. And so as I stated previously, today's workshop is to look at the Nevada laws and policies. And so I would ask if anyone, once I have a question, if anyone is able to come up to the microphone, please state your name and what organization you represent, or if you don't represent an organization, and see if you can offer any insights or answers to the question. For anyone who wants to get off topic or answer things that aren't related to the specific question, I am going to, or I may cut you off and redirect you to the specific topic at hand. Again, this isn't a forum to complain about energy issues at large. It's really a chance for us to roll up our sleeves and dig into this. And so the first question that I have, if anyone is able to answer, is, and I'm asking this because I think it's important because it sets the tone of what laws need to be changed, is why are we doing this in a constitutional amendment? Nevada no other state has done this pursuant to a constitutional amendment. And why are we putting it into a constitutional amendment as opposed to changing the law and the legal framework that we have right now? Is there anyone who could give an answer to that?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
For the record, Matt Griffin with NACEC/ECI. To address the question, it's a question that we've had a lot over, I guess, however long it's been, a 2-year period. There's a couple reasons, some of which are political, that I don't think this committee necessarily cares about. But strictly from a legal perspective, I think as a lawyer, there was, I don't know, three or so lawyers working on the drafting of this, all of which were comfortable with the idea of putting something like this in the state constitution. And it's not an issue of comparing it to what's already in the Constitution, because we have lotteries and marijuana and all kinds of things in the Constitution that many people would argue don't belong in there. I think energy, of course, is something a little bit more significant than some of that, in my opinion at least, and deserves some types of constitutional protection. And really what this petition is in a lot of ways, it's similar to an equal protection type non-monopolistic practices exclusion of franchise petition. It's not foreign to a lot of the constitutions, particularly from the original colonies. Some of them had provisions in there that prevented the grant of exclusive franchises and monopolies. And so I think just from a comfort level, we all got to the point where we thought it was appropriate to have something like this in the Constitution. Probably the biggest practical reason is when you talk about, and when I was asked to start looking at this issue, it is, in my opinion, my field of practice is predominantly in initiative petitions on the legal side of the practice. And I'm of the opinion that there is both positive and negative consequences and aspects of the petition, but you have to do it responsibly. And in assessing this and assessing what is the energy future of Nevada going to be, this petition, in very concise terms, is how do you incorporate the people in the legislature and every interested party into the process in the best way possible? And to do that, you do it through the Constitution in the way it's drafted, which is you give the people a certain amount of rights, you allow them to vote whether they want those rights or they don't want those rights. If they say that they want those rights, then you pass it to the policymakers and say, okay, this is the new framework that the people of Nevada want, and it's up to those policymakers, and I would include you and your body as part of that policymaking consideration, to get everybody in the room like you're doing here today, and that the legislature's doing, and the governor's task force is doing, and the legislature will do should this pass, and get everybody with different perspectives and different areas of the market into the room to discuss the best way to put it together. So that's why we went the route of doing it that way.
And thank you for that, Mr. Griffin, and thank you for being here this morning.
Sure.
One thing in my mind when I think the constitutional amendment is, there's the permanence to it. We have the First Amendment, right to freedom of press, religious liberty. Parts of our state constitution are in front of the Nevada Supreme Court, etched in stone. And the permanence of it, I think, makes a bold statement about Nevada. But then on the other hand, it's that permanence of it that makes it concerning in terms of we're going to be stuck with it for potentially forever, where we're talking about the basic framework of our state government. Do you see both sides of that? Sure.
Again, for the record, Matt Griffin, I do, and that was considered when we were drafting it. And I get the point of permanence, although I know it's not permanent, it always can be removed from the Constitution. But taking a constitutional measure that, at its core, really what it does is grant rights. And then it's been said, and I've heard people comment in the past, that, and part of the point of this hearing today is trying to figure out what needs to be changed and what doesn't need to be changed. It doesn't dictate really much, except for the fact that you can't have a monopoly, you can't have exclusive franchise, that people should have choice. So there is room within the Constitution, the constitutional amendment, to enact a whole array of procedures on the back end. And if the legislature decides that they want to, just for example, think that, okay, for Southern Nevada, meaningful choices means, I'm just pulling numbers out of the sky, it means at least 3 or 4 or 5 retail providers, but in rural Nevada, it means something different, something less. They have the ability to go and change that. They have the ability to go back and amend that within the constitutional language without having to repeal anything to correct for it.
No, thank you for that answer, and then that kind of will lead me, if you don't mind staying up here, or unless someone else from the audience, either in Carson City or Vegas, wants to weigh in on my first question about why we're doing this through a constitutional amendment as opposed to just a change in NRS provisions. When I see some of the phrases in this about open competitive market, the first thing that comes to my mind is, government hands off. That's open competitive, allow the free, a capitalist marketplace to run itself. In the language in this initiative, though it contains that open competitive market language, it also has language, as you just mentioned, that allows the legislature the ability to pass laws. It talks about provisions of reducing rates, discusses the ability of the legislature to have energy policies, enact renewable energy policies. So do you envision this to be a truly open and competitive market, or is this something else other than that?
So it's a tough question to answer because it is somewhat broad. If I don't answer it, please ask me to repeat. I would point to the policy statement. I think the policy statement says most clearly what the open market should look like, which is prohibit the grant of monopoly and exclusive franchising, that everybody should have meaningful choices among different providers, and that economic and regulatory burdens shall be minimized in order to promote competition and choices. That is the heart of what the petition dictates. I would say that yes, kind of answer the question more simply. A lot of people have referred to this as deregulation, and I know that term can sometimes get into the political side of this, and I don't speak from the political side because that's not what I do. I would just say that deregulation is not an appropriate term, because this is not a deregulating petition. This is a re-regulating petition. It's restructuring the market. So I don't think anything in here envisions that the government is going to be hands-off and it's this laissez-faire, open market type of competition. I don't see that at all. In fact, it was intended to be the opposite. The government is required, I think, under this petition to put up certain safeguards and security measures so that, and that's listed just in paragraph 3A, provisions that reduce costs to customers, protect against service disconnections and unfair practices. Provisions that reduce costs to customers, protect against service disconnections and unfair practices. So I think there is definitely an obligation upon the legislature in this body to enact provisions around the open market. And some of those provisions could be something from barriers to entering the market to refashioning the Public Utilities Commission to be the market overseer and determine what practices should be implemented and what shouldn't, and who should be allowed and who shouldn't. So I don't think it is an open market petition, but it's certainly not deregulated. It's not government hands off. There's going to be a lot of oversight from the legislature in this body.
No, and thank you for clarifying the intent of that, because I have heard just in a lot of conversations that this is a deregulation, and I even mentioned last week that I view this as a re-regulation. It's a restructuring, but it's not a complete hands-off. The government has nothing. Government laissez-faire type situation.
In simplest terms, Mr. Chair, this envisions that this body would no longer be responsible for setting the rates that consumers pay to the utility, but that doesn't mean this body doesn't maintain significant control over who gets to enter the market, the conditions of entering, and then how you operate in an open market.
So that leads me to another question, and if you don't mind,
Sure.
I don't want anyone who comes up here to speak to always feel in the hot seat or anything, but I am looking for a dialogue. And so I appreciate anyone who's willing to come up and provide some of these answers. And Mr. Griffin is one of the drafters of this. You're one of the best people to be able to do that. Is with respect to allowing the legislature some parameters in enacting laws, you still envision, if this passes this November, that will the legislature still be able to, for example, and I've heard some concerns regarding this, enact a renewable portfolio standard, the RPS standard?
Yes.
And do you, and how would we be able to, and I mean we, the collective we of the state of Nevada, how would the legislature be able to do that consistent with constitutional provisions that allow for choice?
Sure, I hear that a lot. If I understand your question correctly, I think if you look at paragraph 2, last sentence, nothing in it herein, excuse me, I miss, is paragraph 3C, which is nothing in here shall be construed to invalidate Nevada's public policies on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and environmental protection, or that limit the legislature's ability to impose such policies. So that is an affirmative statement. Actually, at the drafting phase, I was not convinced that we would even have to put that in there, because I think that exists anyways. The open market doesn't limit the legislature's ability to oversee the open market, or this body's ability to see the open market. So they could have a renewable portfolio standard. They could have requirements of resource mix. They could have certain providers in the market at some threshold level only provide renewable energy. They can include, right now, they can include all types of users. They can include not all types of users. I think they retain, as I envision this petition being enacted, they retain full authority to instigate any renewable policies that they desire. It doesn't require, this petition doesn't require anybody to set costs. And I think what you're probably getting at the question is, if you have a mix of RPS or any other type of renewable requirement, how does that affect the cost? This petition envisions these as market entry barriers, and if you're not getting the cost set by the government, you're getting the cost set by the competition. And so if all are forced to abide by the same rules as the competition, it still is competition.
And so is it your intent in this petition that, for example, the legislature could, increase, for example, the RPS, standard for Nevada, and use that as a requirement for entry into the retail market here in the state, that a business that wants to come and sell its energy and provide services, that they need to have a certain mix of renewable energy, and that the legislature will still retain the authority to do that?
Yes. Yes.
You see, one concern, or at least thought in my mind, is, on the lawyer hat, you see any Commerce Clause problems with that if we're putting any type of barriers or restrictions on coming into the state, and with having a certain type of mix or is that something that's you don't think is even on the radar?
It was discussed, and I know kind of what you're getting at. I guess my best answer on the Dormant Commerce Clause, it's hard to answer without a specific set of facts in front of you. I think there's a lot of room for the state to regulate this under the Dormant Commerce Clause. I think there's probably circumstances where it's going to have to be taken into consideration, depending on the participant and the reach over state lines and all those issues. But no, I don't think that you have a specific Dormant Commerce Clause prohibition on establishing market entry barriers in the state of Nevada. I think it's just a specific proposal that would have to be examined to do that.
And so do you think if, and again, I'm just having a conversation here.
Sure.
If the state of Nevada said, we still don't want nuclear energy, for example, sold here in Nevada as a matter of state policy, under this ballot initiative, the legislature can still
Yes,
do that and say, we don't want it here as a matter of state policy.
in my opinion, without question, as they can now. I don't think that affects them either way as far as what their authority would be. As I said, this petition, at least from ones that I've worked on, and it's been quite a few, over 20 or 30, this is very unique insofar as it incorporates the people and the legislature together to structure what this looks at like at the end. It is not designed to curb legislative authority, except for the specific areas in here that it says that it does, which is primarily upon exclusive franchises. But no, I think they retain that authority as they do now.
Okay, thank you. And again, I think that's, at least so far in some of the conversations I've been a part of and heard, I think it's important to clearly put that out there and have that discussion, that this is putting, at least from what I'm hearing, is putting in goalposts, so to speak, but within those posts, there's still room to navigate and create legislation.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
That is fair.
Okay.
I mean, I would juxtapose that with kind of going back to your first question, and then I'll be quiet and get out.
No, I'm glad you're out here. Thank you for being here.
If you look back at the drafting phase about putting the legal issues aside on constitutional versus statutory, but the statutory follows a different process than a constitutional petition, right? The statutory goes get signatures, goes to the legislature. The legislature has 3 options when it gets to them, and then it goes to the next election. So having a handful of people draft a legislative statutory initiative and behind closed rooms without anybody knowing about the policies that they want, that they specifically are going to propose to the people and have them vote on, I think is a horrible way to make policy, first of all. I think it's, second of all, an easy way, given how complicated energy is, for them to screw it up and then have a problem in that legislative session where you might have other measures that are competing against you on the ballot. I think it makes the ability to change Nevada's law and to reset the table an impossibility to do it statutorily. So I think I would just leave that with you as kind of a context of why the petition not only is in the Constitution, but written the way that it is. It is not intended to, unless it specifically says in here the ways that we've been talking about, it's not intended to specifically hamstring the authority of the legislature or the authority of this body. It just changes this body's kind of role, I think, turns it from setting cost to being an oversight of the market, and I think it gives the legislature a different set of parameters to enact their policies, but doesn't change what policies they can enact.
And thanks for that view in your comments on that. Sir, I see we've come up to the mic as well. Do you have anything to add?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Ned Ross, representing RESA, the Retail Energy Supply Association. Just wanted to echo Matt's comments and also say that we're coming in from all over the country, and our companies in this trade association are looking. People all over the world are watching this, and I'll try and speak more slowly for you. People all over the world are watching this proceeding because you have gone down the road of amending your Constitution to adopt this. I wanted you to know that we take great comfort in the fact that you're amending your Constitution, that there is a process here. It's a deliberate process, and once it's finalized in November, we'll know we can go forward and confidently come in and invest our resources here to make this work for you. So I just wanted to say that it is an important component. It's not essential. It wasn't essential in Texas. It wasn't essential in Pennsylvania and other states where they have done this. But it does give us a degree of confidence that this is not something that's going to be quickly reversed down the road.
And thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
In your opinion, in your experience, does the fact that we are looking at a constitutional amendment, does that help, the business climate or the business view in looking at what Nevada is doing? And I guess I'm asking that in the sense of, I think regulatory uncertainty is bad for business. Businesses generally don't want to invest in marketplaces that, where you don't know what one thing, what the climate's going to be from one year to the next, and that you want some continuity. Does the idea that this is in the Constitution, and there is some permanence to it, It's getting a tattoo. I mean, in one respect, it's going to be hard to remove without a scar, but doing that helps with that certainty that it's kind of planting a goalpost, and we're not going back.
It is a powerful statement by 72% of your voters that caught everyone's attention in November 2016. It was a powerful statement that your state wants to move forward with a competitive market. And we hope we see the same kinds of results this year as well in the election. There is nothing more important to us than regulatory certainty and knowing that we can enter this market, invest in it, and know that it's not going to rapidly change. Regulations, a regulatory lawyer once told me many years ago, regulation is a blunt instrument. It is not a powerful tool for change. It's a powerful tool for regulation, and it's best dealt with up front. So what we hope to do is help you all not only form the statutory construct that makes all of these elements work, but also overlay it with very well thought out, carefully crafted regulations that are promulgated on top of it that give you and your successors the ability to manage what will be, I hope, the most successful energy market in the world.
Thank you for that. And to add, I think the Constitution can be a blunt instrument too. Anything that gets in its way gets crushed sometimes. So thank you for your comments, though. I very much appreciate them. Mr. Sullivan, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Reynolds. For the record, I'm Dylan Sullivan with the Natural Resources Defense Council. So I am not an attorney, so I want to caveat that just right now. I'm a policy analyst, policy advocate person, but I do have experience with renewable portfolio standards laws in Nevada and other states, and also I guess a rough understanding of how the Commerce Clause interacts with renewable portfolio standards. So to your first question, which I'll paraphrase as, why can we do an RPS given energy choice in the language of the amendment? I think there are two reasons. The first is the one that the earlier speaker identified, just that the amendment expressly says that you can implement a clean energy policy or a renewable portfolio standard. So that's reason number one, and I think that's really important because it's a policy that's sort of explicitly called out in the language of the initiative. And I think the second reason, and I think it's really important for understanding from a policy perspective and from a legal perspective why it's allowable, is that under pretty much every renewable portfolio standard I'm familiar with, the obligation to purchase renewable energy is on the provider, not on the individual customer. And if you think about providing meaningful choices in a competitive market, it's choices for the customer. It's not necessarily choices for the provider. And so I think the policy and legal reason why it's okay to implement an RPS, given the language and spirit of the amendment, is that the obligation is on the provider. Second, on the Commerce Clause issues, and again, not a lawyer, but I do have, there are a lot of people have written on this, and there have been, Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch wrote an opinion in Colorado recently articulating how a renewable portfolio standard can sort of pass muster under the Commerce Clause. What's important from a Commerce Clause perspective is that the state's laws not sort of treat Nevada businesses differently than non-Nevada businesses in the service of sort of favoring Nevada businesses compared to other entities. And what the state can do under and not fall afoul of the Commerce Clause is create restrictions on all businesses that operate in the state that further a legitimate state interest. And legitimate state interests include things like improving air quality, reducing water use, reducing citizens' exposure to fossil fuel price volatility. those are all legitimate state interests. What isn't legitimate is saying that we want, what's not legitimate from a Commerce Clause perspective. I think there's still, okay policy reasons, but what's not okay is saying, we just want to favor Nevada businesses, and we're implementing this restriction in order to do that. That's my understanding.
No, thank you for that. And thank you again for all three speakers that came up. Another question, again, along the lines of, and again, my purpose this morning is just to have this conversation to get everything out there on the record. Is there a difference, and I noticed in one of the provisions of the ballot question, it discusses the ability, nothing is intended to invalidate Nevada's public policies on renewable energy. Was there an intent to distinguish policies, the term policies from the term laws? And in my mind, just the lawyer hat is, I think of Assembly Bill 405, for example. At the very beginning, there is a statement of legislative intent, legislative policy, but later on in the bill, we get into the actual laws. Was that looking at too fine of a distinction? Mr. Griffin, any help on that I'd appreciate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Matt Griffin, I think maybe it is a little too fine tooth of a comb. Policies was used to be something bigger than just laws. That I don't think anything in this petition restricts the legislature's authority to do that. And so in that respect, that sentence is kind of just an affirmative statement to say anybody who alleges that they don't retain this authority is wrong. Instead of going to the legal reasons to say they still have this authority in the petition because the petition doesn't take it away. So it's a step further, an affirmative statement. It's like putting something in there that says this petition is subject to the United States Constitution. Well, of course it is. This is just taking that extra step to say nothing, not only is the petition doesn't affect the legislature's authority or this body's authority, it's a step further to say it does not, and it's not just laws, it's the policies that may be implemented.
No, so it's intended to be an affirmative statement
correct.
As opposed to a restrictive
That's correct.
Statement.
Because I would submit, Mr. Chair, that without that, I think it's 3C, I apologize.
Yes,
I forgot
yeah.
my petition. I think without that statement in there, it's still true. I don't think anything else in the petition takes it away from the legislature. But this is just an affirmative statement that, yes, they in fact do, so that any challenge to that authority could be pointed to in a paragraph.
Okay, no, thank you. That's actually very helpful for me. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Another question that I have is with respect to the statement about reduction of costs, where it says that there still may be provisions in the law that reduce costs to customers or allow for the legislature or nothing shall be limiting the ability of the legislature to enact provisions that reduce costs to customers. Was there a goal that was behind that specific language? Again, when I think of competition and I think of choice, it does allow folks exposure to the good and the bad of a market. Costs can rise, they can go down. There is some, there's volatility there. Was there intent in this language, or does anybody believe in this language that there is still the ability of the legislature or another body that the legislature directs to have cost reduction measures still in place? For example, putting in some kind of rate caps that if rates exceed a certain, if there is a hurricane, some type of natural disaster, and the market forces would cause rates to dramatically increase, that there's an ability of the state legislature to put a cap in place or put some kind of safety valve, so to speak, in place to allow customers to not have to feel the raw effects of that, at least immediately. And that was just a question in my mind. And again, I'm just putting questions out there. If nobody has the immediate answer, that's okay too, because we're going to come back and revisit some of these next week. So, Mr. Weber, thank you for coming to the microphone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh Weber, for the record, representing the Smart Energy Alliance. Our understanding is that in other states there have been cases where, because of market conditions, cost caps and other tools were used to get the market moving and to respond to market issues or exigencies that arose. I think that this gives the legislature and this body, the commission by extension, the ability to respond if that is required. But the main goal, as I understand this language, is that those laws would enable a liquid market and enable customers to have the benefit of the lowest prices that the market can deliver. So it kind of does both. It still does give the state the ability to step in if necessary to make sure customers are protected.
And so, in your opinion, theoretically, in legislation, we can, again, I'm using the state collective, we, enact, a policy or a safety net, for example, as this transition occurs, so that there isn't rate shock, so to speak, and that to the extent there is something that's unforeseeable that occurs, there is a buffer zone in place so that nobody's bills all of a sudden spike really high. Is that what's envisioned a little bit in there?
Josh Weber, for the record. I believe so. I think that this is one of those lessons learned clauses. If you look back, there were states that had those kind of provisions and the ability to act nimbly, and states that didn't. And those states that didn't have that ability didn't do so well with energy choice. I don't want to point any fingers at California, but that's in many people's opinion, that's what made it difficult in the beginning, because they didn't have flexibility to deal with spikes.
And thank you for that, because I hear about the horror story examples, and that there's the doomsday scenario, and somebody's power bill goes from $100 a month to $500 a month or something just outrageous like that, and you hear certain select examples of that, and to make, again, why we're looking at what laws need to change, what legislation can be put forward to make this initiative work, is what measures can we put in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, that we have a life jacket on this, so to speak.
Yes, Josh Weber, for the record. Mr. Chairman, I think that is correct. And as I said, I think it's a lesson learned. I do note that Mr. Ross, who has a lot more experience in this particular area, is here, and I would be very interested to hear his comments.
Thanks, Mr. Weber. Mr. Ross, thank you for coming to the mic again.
Thank you. Ned Ross with RESA. Mr. Chairman, you covered off a lot of ground there with that question in terms of price caps and market implementation questions, and I don't know what level of detail you wish to dive into today. I would probably want to keep this fairly high level, I would guess, just to kind of touch on the overarching structure that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I'd appreciate. Yeah, I think higher level, the legal parts of it today.
We don't need to go back through the history of what happened in California, but it was a market structure problem that caused their problems. They had completely unregulated wholesale prices. They had caps on retail prices, and those didn't go well together. In addition, they had a flawed wholesale structure there. So that was just a lesson for all of us on how not to do it. And the other states learned from it and went a different direction. In a competitive market, price caps can be helpful or they can be very harmful. And I would suggest if you look, for example, at ERCOT in Texas, the price cap is $9,000 per megawatt hour for wholesale power. Now, none of us want to pay $9,000 per megawatt hour for wholesale power. If we have touched it, we have not touched it very often or for very long. That might be for one 15-minute interval in a very, very high scarcity moment. But there's a reason for that price cap to be that high. It is that high so that you attract more resources to the market to backfill that void, and that won't happen again. And that's precisely what has happened in that competitive market. So I think there are a lot of lessons that we can take from many of the jurisdictions. The price caps vary by state or by power region. And there are many, many lessons we can take here and bring in to you, and you all can weigh which direction you wish to go. So just know this has been done. It's been done successfully in terms of price caps. And then in terms of market implementation and the transition from the monopoly utility to competitive providers, there are several ways we can do that as well. We have experience in all of those states. We can have experts come in and tell you how each state did it. We can show you the rules that were promulgated behind it, that supported it. Those rules were for a period of time. They phased out, and then competition implemented and didn't have those restrictions on them any longer. And each one seemed to have worked fairly successfully. I know Pat Wood came in and visited with you on the governor's on the governor's task force, and mentioned to you how they arrived at the price to beat methodology that they used in Texas. Very interesting scenario, very controversial. If you go back and read the 2003 scope of competition report that the Public Utility Commission of Texas puts out, you can see real time every 2 years how that was going. They go back through and talk about how consumers were served and how it worked out. There were no price shocks. The price shock is that the highest price that the market had to pay was 6% below what they were paying to the utility at the time. That was the deal.
In some of the examples, I think in Pennsylvania and some other states back east, Mr. Ross, there were some rate caps initially put in place while the transition was ongoing. And then once those rate caps were taken off, there were some reports of spikes in energy prices or monthly power bills. Are there some lessons learned that Nevada could put in place to make sure that our ratepayers don't experience that?
There are a tremendous number of lessons learned, particularly in the price cap world. At one point, the cap in Texas was $1,000, but they thought that was still too high. And so the commissioners discussed putting on what they called a shame cap. And if you sold power as a wholesale generator, if you sold power above $300, they would post your company's name online and shame you into trying to bring your price back down. That was not an effective tool. That was not a good way to control pricing. The way you achieve stable pricing in a market like this is to attract investment here. And the way I often tell people to think about this is, if you're going to lend money to a company to come in and build something here in this electric market in Nevada, are you going to build into an unstable electric market, or would you rather build into a stable regulatory regime where you're not subjected to constantly moving price caps, you're not subjected to new regulations over and over? And I think what we're talking about here is allowing the market to function, giving those investors the confidence to come in. What would the banker do? Is what I would say. What would the banker do? Allowing, encouraging those bankers to lend money here to build those assets that you need to improve the electric reliability and keep the prices contained. So allow the market to work instead of the regulatory fiat.
And that's what I'm just, some of these questions that I have here today is trying to have that balance of this isn't necessarily true open competition on one hand. There's a quasi competition type element to this, that it's not completely government hands-off, that it's, we're looking at the state government to create a retail market, we're looking at the state government to have some type of cost controls, we're looking at the state government to actually have some type of possible cost reduction measures in place, and so that there's still the government's hand in this how it's envisioned through this ballot initiative. Is that?
Yes, sir. I would venture to say there is not another stakeholder in this proceeding who is more interested in seeing well-crafted, careful, thorough regulations put in place that include comprehensive consumer protections, guidance for the market, punishment for bad behavior, all of those components. We want to see very carefully crafted rules, and this has been done in other states. This isn't new.
I might have to challenge you on that, because I might be in the sense of a stakeholder who's more interested than anyone else in making sure that that's done.
Right,
No, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone in here has a vested interest to see that the rules are done the right way. But I think a lot of folks believed that companies like mine that were coming in to compete here were going to come in, and it was kind of, there were pieces done in the media that implied that this was going to become the Wild West, that there were not going to be rules and regulations and companies were going to come in and just run wild here. I can tell you that's the farthest from the truth in every other state we operate in. There are very, very carefully crafted rules in every other state where we operate, and we actually abide by those rules and appreciate those rules because we don't want bad actors in this sector either. We don't want unhappy Nevadans. We want happy consumers here. We want people to enjoy this market and embrace it.
Okay, and I appreciate that analogy of the Wild West. Because again, I've heard that conversation come up in the context of this, that this is just going to open up a free-for-all. And from what I'm hearing in some of the dialogue today, that's not the intent, and that's not the vision for this.
In every other state I know of, Mr. Chairman, I believe we are faced with the stiffest penalty of license revocation. Every state requires licensure for a retail provider to sell power in the state, and every retail provider is subjected to that threat of losing your license to make a sale in that state. That's devastating. We would expect you to have that at a minimum. Beyond that, we want you to have other protections that will give you confidence that we are doing the right thing. We absolutely invite you to do that, and we want to work with you on those rules so you understand which ones have worked. We have a lot of history and a lot of experience with these rules, so we're happy to work with you on that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ross, and I want to get into more of that tomorrow, even when we're talking about some of the creating a retail marketplace, or tomorrow, or I believe also Thursday as well, so thank you. Is there any, with respect to why we're talking about the authority or the limits of the language in this constitutional provision with respect to any type of rate caps or the authority of the legislature, is there any conflict that anyone sees with some of the other provisions in the statutory language, that nothing shall be construed to limit a person's rights to sell, trade, or otherwise dispose of electricity? And what I guess I'm looking for is there conflict in any of the statutory or constitutional provisions that are being proposed, or is really any perceived conflict just something that again might be too hyper-technical in looking at this language? And I guess to explain my question a little bit better, I see at the end of the sentence on section 2, nothing herein shall be construed as limiting such persons or entities' rights to sell, trade, or otherwise dispose of electricity. That would be a constitutional right in my mind, because that's in the Constitution. Does that need to be read in conjunction within the other provisions within this constitutional change, or is that something someone will take in isolation and try to run with it? that was at least something in my mind that just wanted to discuss. For example, will a business say that this constitutional amendment allows them to sell electricity to Canada or Mexico, that they have a constitutional right to kind of do with it whatever they choose if they generate it, and or is that too broad of an interpretation or too broad of a construction?
Thank
Mr.
you.
Griffin, and I apologize if my question was a little bit rambling.
I'll answer the best I can.
Okay, thank
And
you.
if I need to clarify, please let me know. It's the latter of what you laid out. That provision is intended to be read within that paragraph, so that is to say, all people and entities have the right to choose, but they can also choose to generate themselves. So it's saying the right to an open market should not prohibit a person's or a business's ability to generate on their own. That's the intention of that is, what that is. It does not say that you have an unfettered right to self-generation that cannot be regulated in any sense. That's not the intention of what it says, and nor do I think it reads that way. It's just modifying the previous paragraph that it's in.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Hi.
Good morning, Debria Twilliger for the record. On behalf of staff, I did, and this gets back to your last question. So, I guess I just wondered what the drafters, what their intent is, the provisions that reduce cost to customers. If you think about, I think in Maryland and DC, after the price caps went away, customers had some, there's some volatility and they had some price spikes. So I wonder how we read that section that requires provisions to reduce costs to customers in conjunction with having an open and retail market. How do we, if as soon as we took away price caps, for example, if we have that as part of the transition, and you take those away and you have a price spike, does that provision of the ECI kick in such that we need to look, the commission needs to be nimble and maybe think about reinstituting the price cap? So I guess I'm wondering, to me those are a little bit of conflict. When you have an open market, you wouldn't necessarily have price caps, as the gentleman from RISA was talking about in Texas. How do you read that provision in conjunction with the open market? I would wonder what the drafters were thinking.
And so from the regulatory operations staff's view is you're concerned about still some conflict.
I am, between these, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
Just the provisions that would ensure reduced costs to customers. How do you read that in conjunction with having an open market? If there is volatility, if natural gas costs spike, or we have a cold snap, or something that causes price volatility to go up, which happens in markets, and that's expected. But how do we read those provisions in conjunction with each other?
And that was kind of what my question was getting at, and I see Mr. Ross has come up again. Want to take a stab at that, Mr. Ross?
Ed Ross with RISA. I'm sorry, you're with staff?
I am, thank
I
you.
missed your name. You talking faster than I could think.
Debria Twilliger.
Let me raise this up. One of my colleagues said they couldn't hear me. What I'll suggest to you is this. If you will go into this proceeding, assuming that Nevada is already a competitive electric market, but you want to improve it dramatically, what would you do to it? Okay? If you start from scratch and say, we're going from a monopoly 100-year-old regulatory construct, and we're going to switch this completely to a competitive market, it's a much harder mental leap to get to that point. But if you assume you're already competitive and you want to make it better, what would you do to it? What you have to realize is, if the market is properly structured, if you put a open for business sign at the border, and you get a dozen companies to come in here and sell electricity, those dozen companies are going to compete vigorously on price and service and other amenities to win your business. They are not going to win your business by charging more than the competitor, okay? It's a whole different way to think about the electric market. It's just hard when you've been accustomed to it one way to switch. It takes some time to get your brain to adjust to that methodology. But if you think of it in terms of other products and services in your state, like groceries and iPhones and other products, all those things have to compete on price. None of them are overcharging, and I don't know anyone that says I refuse to pay less than the maximum price for power just because. They don't do that. They go out and they shop and they find the lower price. So it requires you to look at this in a different way. Price caps do not achieve price stability in a competitive market. They can destabilize the market as they did in California, okay? So what we have to do is set the market up properly so that competition is invited, and that alone will be the best preventative measure from having high prices. Now, if you, and one other, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, one other statement on the price. The absolute price of energy, as I read the language, and Matt can clarify this, as I read the language, it doesn't say that it guarantees reduced prices. If natural gas prices and other underlying fuel components increase in price, the price of power must increase or it will destabilize. So we cannot guarantee an absolute lower price for energy if the underlying components all go up in price. So I want to be careful that we're realistic about what can happen. What I can tell you is that the competitive market will make prices as low as they can be, the service as high as it can be, and all of the options and technology and all those other things will be as good as they can possibly be. That's not true in a regulatory regime.
And thank you for that, Mr. Ross. And one thing that there's some conflict in my mind, just why we're just having a discussion, is sometimes the clean, renewable energy is not always the cheapest. You know, sometimes coal-fired electricity is cheaper. And so if we have you know, a purely competitive market where the cheapest you know, product is in that marketplace, it might not always be the renewable, clean energy product, which then comes in conflict with some of our state policies if we want clean, renewable energy, but it's not always the cheapest. And how to reconcile that and to make sure, you know, in my mind, with this constitutional amendment, that there is room, play in the joint, so to speak, to reconcile that. Do you see that play in the joints? I see Mr. Griffin's up here as well.
Yeah, I will tell you, from my experience in other states, the renewable products at one time were far more expensive than the underlying cheapest products that were out there. Because at the time, coal, natural gas, other products were far cheaper than renewable. With the price decrease in wind and solar energy in particular, and the increase now in underlying fossil fuels, renewable products are almost at parity in terms of the retail price, particularly to residential customers, as the other prices. I shared with you last week when I had a chance to visit with you the Texas Power to Choose website. I would refer everybody to the powertochoose.org. Make sure you do .org or you get a private website. Powertochoose.org website, and enter a zip code in there and see what the residential prices are. You can filter that site for 100% renewable products and get a 12-month product at an eye-popping rate. I can tell you it's probably under 10 cents for a term.
And I think it's going to be plug that site, but it was impressive, truly, as I mentioned to you, what you showed me.
And I believe your friends, Mr. Chairman, in Texas at the commission there would be happy to visit with you about it and help you create your own site here. I think it's a terrific shopping site. Other folks would say, please don't have the commission do it. Let the private sites come in, and there are a number of them. Let the private vendors come in and offer their products on their own sites. You may not even have to invest in that. So something to think about, but those sites are very helpful in terms of transparency and shopping and all kinds of things for the state to show how it works.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, anything you could add?
The only thing I just want to make sure I address staff's question. I think it is, everything I've heard you and staff say is correct. There is room within, because it's not, like I go back to the earlier point, it's not an open market, hands off, no regulation. It is an open market so far as people can have options. Going back to the phrase, the meaningful choices, but that doesn't mean that those meaningful choices, so long as there are options to choose from within the market, the legislature or this body can set up the parameters for entry into the market. So long as that doesn't, I guess for lack of a better term, reduce it down so there is no choices or squeeze everybody out. But yes, there is authority within this petition to structure the open market in the way that you're referencing. I think you kind of said it right, which there's room in the joints, within the joints.
And that was a, I think I said.
That's the language I understand.
I took that line from a U.S. Supreme Court justice in a different constitutional context, that states must, government must have play in the joints, and so to speak, to make constitutional provisions work.
And again, just the specific example, if the legislature were to say X percentage of renewable energy, they can do that, and then the market is still open, and everybody who can comply with the state policy to enter the market may enter the market.
Thank you for that. And then to move this along a little bit. And so generally my understanding is, when we're looking at rates, we have bundled rates. There's the transmission component of a rate that's generally, set by FERC. And then we have a distribution component, and we have a generation component. The way I'm reading some language in this, especially with section 3A, is that we're not necessarily looking at deregulating the distribution component. And really, it would allow a choice with respect to the generation component of the unbundled rate. Is that correct in your intent?
Mr. Chairman, Matt Griffin, that's correct. It specifically speaks to the generation and then says the legislature doesn't have to do anything with transmission if they don't want to. But this speaks directly to generation is the focus of it.
And for folks listening, or NV Energy through Nevada Power Company, Sierra Pacific Power Company, they own the wires and the transmission lines, and so the transmission and distribution components of that. So this would envision still that NV Energy, for lack of a better word, still owns the roads that others travel on, and still gets paid and compensated for that service for using those lines. But what this would change is allowing for choice on where that electricity is generated from, where it comes from, and then who services, for example, the homeowner.
Yes, that under this petition, that is lawful, that is contemplated. I think it also just, until we get, frankly, it is unusual having to go to another vote of the people. I don't know what's going to happen, and then you talk about predicting what the legislature will want to do or won't want to do. I have no idea what they want to do, but I would say that is certainly, as far as when you talk with people in the energy industry, whether law or policy, that is definitely an option that the legislature is going to have, that the NV Energy keeps the pulls and wires, and then the generation is opened up. It also could, if it wanted, the legislature could change that, and they can change that in a myriad of different ways as far as the pulls and wires. This petition does not require that they change that, I think was the big distinction. It just speaks to the requiring the generation. So I think your point is correct, that is a very possible and even probably likely scenario, but I don't think this petition takes the authority away from the legislature to structure that side of it however they want within the rules of FERC and all the other rules that you're very familiar with.
Mr. Chairman, Matt?
Yeah, go ahead. Or just 1 second, Mr. Ross, I want to ask you. So you don't see, Mr. Griffin, that this language at least limits that or is prescriptive in the sense of it gives the legislature, again, some room to move on how they want to construct that?
So I can tell you, and I remember this distinctly during the drafting phase, it's a generating petition, and that line exists in there to say, just for clarification purposes, that the legislature, we're talking about generation, and to build this open market, you do not have to get into transmission and distribution. You can, but we're saying that this petition doesn't force you to do or limit your ability or somehow affect anything that they can do on that respect. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does, because that's the way I was reading it and looking in terms of where truly the choice is coming in with respect to our bundled rates, and it seemed to focus on the generation piece. Mr. Ross, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Ned Ross with RISA again. I just wanted to clarify structurally what most other states have done here. And that is that the utility that will continue to be regulated will be all transmission and distribution assets owned by the utility. Those will continue to be rate regulated here at the commission. That includes everything up to the meter on the back of your house. So most states have allowed the utility to continue to own the meter and control it. In other countries, I think they have looked at and actually implemented markets where each of the competitive providers would own the meter that went on the back of the house, and the meter kind of went with the provider, okay? I don't find that to be the most efficient model, so I would encourage the utility to control the meter for a couple of reasons. One is you're not moving meters all the time on the backs of homes. Two, the data that comes from those meters is then managed by the utility. So one of the functions they'll have to undertake, they manage the data today, but one of the big valuable things that you can enjoy here with that smart meter data are a number of different kinds of products that you may not enjoy, okay? Time of use products, prepaid products, all kinds of things that we can offer to consumers through that meter. So we want that meter to be stable, we want the utility to manage the data, and we want to be able to transfer customers as they switch providers. We want them to readily be able to transfer them. That's just an electronic switch now. It can happen in a matter of an hour. You can switch a customer from one provider to another. So all of that lends itself to a stable market and a really sound footprint for the utility to continue to operate, okay? So transmission, distribution, all the way to the meter is I think the regulated function. Just want to point out that the competitive side is on both sides of the meter. We're now selling competitive energy behind the meter to the consumer, and we're also purchasing wholesale power from the generation community, or developing our own, as it might be, or selling our own power in that market. So it's both sides of the regulated utility will be competitive.
Thank you, Mr. Russ. At this time, I was taking a 15-minute break for our court reporter, but want to thank everyone who has come so far up to the microphone to speak. It's truly helpful, and it's the dialogue that I was hoping for. And so we'll take a 15-minute or so break, and we will resume at 11:30. Thank you.
Can you come see me for a minute? Thank you. See you
she's more than ground.
So, why would you want to have it?
You stayed here for the week.
Well, I haven't, I mean, you can make reservations, you can say, you know, see how wonderful what you do. Make a demonstration tomorrow. It's internet. When it does get more, no sun is not decorated. So,
Yeah, the other thing that's kind of interesting, I think, to readers.
Actually, I'm going to stay for 2 weeks. I wanted to. $4,000 in my car. It was insane. I'm not sure. I'm gonna go on
business is shut down.
for vacation. And we're gonna stay for data in America. Yeah, my wife stays there. She says way nicer than any. We'll be there 3 nights.
There's a lot of pesky things they don't deal with. She said it eliminate a lot of variables. I told her that. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, we're gonna go on a 12-day cruise. Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 full days. I think like you would make a reservation, go eat at the restaurant, it's all that. No, you should, for sure, yeah. If you let us know if you want to. Oh, cool, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Once a year.
Yeah.
Eric told me he's talking about cows, he's talking about single questions about
CNN just had a listing with the time I've seen the rest of the town be around.
Yeah.
new list of number 1. The new one? London's came out. Yeah. That was great. No. That's what I thought, that was it. But it looks bigger than that. Oh, really? Yeah. I think this one's similar. It's, the way I well, it is, it's very nice, but it's really, when you go, when I first went there, it's hysterical. You drive past it, and it's got the third size of it there, it's just like this identical. And the casino's massive, cars, hotels. That's like, you ever been to Biloxi? No. So like the boat of Oz is the mini Mirage. It's exactly the same setup when you walk in, it feels exactly. This is literally painted, everything is the same. It's a scale, now, you know, Mirage's entrance is a little weird now, they've changed it, but 10 years ago, it was exact. That's funny.
They still have, he thought something that is criminal. Not yet, because we only got through the work documents,
Well, it stayed at
the,
Because I thought I was.
deposit office, where.
Yeah, Harris was a nice, super nice place.
Harris is
The
one of the
nicest
first
place.
that was the 90s or 91, it was like the Excalibur. Oh, right. Let's see if I see it.
But like, the DI set where the wing is, and that was like, versus the Starbucks for 20
Dawn, how long are they gonna keep the technology videos of these meetings?
I'm still there. That's a link
Thank you. We're back on the record. Joe Reynolds, the presiding officer over this matter in docket 17-10001. It's day one of the workshops regarding the Energy Choice Initiative here in Nevada. Today we are talking about what laws need to be changed, what laws and regulations may need to be amended in the state pursuant to this ballot measure should it pass. And again, I would like to thank all the commenters that came up to the microphone this morning and provided their views and thoughts on these questions. I found them very helpful. And so again, thank you for that. One question I have with respect to what will this constitutional provision mean is its application and the scope of its application to the different entities throughout the state. If, for example, will it apply to the Southern Nevada Water Authority, will it apply to the Colorado River Commission, will it apply to the City of Las Vegas, the City of Reno, and will it also apply to the rural electric associations and to our co-ops in our municipalities? When I look at some of this language, it's broad in some regards, and so is there any opinions and views on who this will apply to or who this will not? If there are any speakers, I would appreciate them.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Brad Van Cleve for Valley Electric Association.
Hello, Mr. Van Cleve, and thank you for coming up.
And I just wanted to address your question about the application to co-ops. Given what seems to be the clear language in the initiative that every person shall have a right to choose, we think that applies to co-ops as well. Now, there would be some latitude to address different co-op situations differently, to deal with issues like the federal power contracts. But I think it would apply to co-ops in our view.
And that would certainly be a change from what we have today. Is that correct?
Yes, it certainly would be a change, but we also believe that the current limited regulation of co-ops that's in current law could be preserved and should be preserved. And specifically with respect to, as you were discussing earlier, maintaining the exclusive right to provide distribution service in a defined service territory in a CPCN, we think that that should be preserved, and that the co-op boards, for example, would continue to have rate setting authority over that function.
In your reading of this language, would the ability of those co-ops to preserve that structure remain intact, or does it, would it become constitutionally prohibited?
We don't see that it's constitutionally prohibited, no. As was discussed earlier, the initiative doesn't really address the provision of transmission and distribution service. So, and it doesn't change the existing law in that regard. And under existing law, the rate setting authority for distribution services with the boards of the co-ops.
Well, thank you for that view. Thank you. Mr. Weber, thank you for coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh Weber for the record. I think that ECI, and speaking with folks who have been involved in drafting and shaping the way the initiative was put together, my understanding is that they viewed the cooperatives and the general improvement districts, the rural electrics, as a really valuable example of aligning the interests of consumers, members, with the interests of the organization itself. And I know that they filed comments saying, well, we buy on behalf of our members, we're member owned. Certainly they have a certain level of choice when they vote for who's going to make decisions within their co-op. In addition, having spoken with folks, I think that it needs to be clear that if somebody wants to take power from someone other than the co-op that serves in their area, well, it looks as though there probably needs to be a path for that to happen given the clear language of the petition. But on the other hand, there is plenty of room in the law to make sure that that co-op, that person voluntarily joined, is held harmless. And certainly part of that is the distribution, the transmission. So certainly I think this affects co-ops, but I think that it is our belief that it can do so in a positive way. And certainly we believe that the value, those federal contracts, I think it's questionable whether you could try to get rid of them anyways. They're federal law. They're not federal law. They're contracts under federal law, and there's a couple of different types of them. But those shouldn't go away. We think that would be bad policy. This is an incredible resource for the state of Nevada, particularly for the citizens who are members in rural cooperative service territory. They are able to offer power at tremendous rates because they're getting a zero carbon, reliable source of power, whether it's from Hoover, from Parker Davis, from the Salt Lake projects. So there's plenty of room to preserve those historical institutions of co-ops, democratic, member-run, member-elected boards that are the regulator for that distribution transmission function. There's plenty of room to preserve and protect those institutions and to make it possible for co-ops to flourish in energy choice. Well, one benefit is they're going to always be the low-cost provider because they have tremendous power resources to draw on.
So it's your view, or the intent of this the ballot provision, that it's not going to negatively impact the co-ops?
Again, because as Mr. Griffin pointed out, this really just sets up a broad new regulatory regime. It's the job of the legislature and people of Nevada to make sure that it doesn't. So there is plenty of room to do it right to protect co-ops. Let's put it that way. But the initiative itself doesn't mandate how it's going to be done.
And just the reason why I'm asking these questions is, do we need to go in and change? Eventually what I want to get to is, do we need to go in and change or amend laws regarding the co-ops and to make it comply with this, or can some of those remain in place?
Josh Weber, for the record, I think that many of those laws, such as the NRS provisions in 704 that define the limited jurisdiction of the commission, that define some basic things about the structure of rural electrics within our state, can remain the same or will require some minor tweaking. But there may be new provisions that are required to make sure that the co-ops are protected and the rights of their members are protected.
Do you have any ideas at this point what those might be?
I think it kind of gets to the retail market question. What is the retail market going to look like? What I would suggest is that whatever the legislature decides as to the proper retail market for the parts of the state that are not served by rural electrics, well, we may need a similar but well-crafted section of legislation that protects co-ops and their members separate from so it's, I don't want to invent any NRS sections, but I think that we're talking about something parallel that talks about how that retail market works in the unique situation of a cooperative or a general improvement district.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Ms. Torliger.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess some of Mr. Weber's statements just engender more questions. And I know you're the one asking questions, but I'll just pose some hypotheticals here. So I guess to the extent that as the gentleman from Valley Electric said, that to the extent that the ECI requires that every customer have a choice. I heard Mr. Weber speak, I think, at the Interim Committee on Energy, and he said this strengthens the position of co-ops. And I think in other states, other states have left cooperatives and munis alone in the context of retail choice. And so looking at it through that lens, how can we, to some extent, leave them alone if it's going to cause, if there are going to be problems with offering them a meaningful choice. But I guess the issue I have, to circle back here, is that if every customer has to have a choice, and then that includes the muni and co-op customers get a choice, and if there could be a competitor who could offer a better price, there might not be in some areas, right? The rurals or co-ops are probably going to have some of the best prices because of the areas they're serving. That's the whole reason for the muni or mostly the co-op to exist. To the extent that there could be somebody that could offer a better price, and those customers, like particularly the high load factor customers, commercial customers, industrial customers, go to the competitor, are we eroding the position of the cooperative such to the extent that they can't exist anymore? So I guess I want to know, how do we read this constitutional language that everybody has to have a choice, including cooperative or muni customers? So did I go around too far that I didn't make sense?
No, I think I'm following your comments here. Mr. Weber, could you give a stab at that?
Sure, Josh Weber for the record. I think it's, again, important to recognize that there's, and I absolutely understand staff's question, and I think it's an important one, but it is really a matter of where there's a will, there's a way. There is room to do exactly what staff is worried about, and I think we have to make that happen. If as an example, if you've got, a big box retailer, it's maybe one of the larger customers in a cooperative service territory, and they say, well, we're going to go with our corporate provider, even though the prices are higher, we're going to do that. It may be that under energy choice they have the right to do that, but it's incumbent on the state then to make sure, in terms of re-regulation, this is a different re-regulation that is being implemented for the rest of the state, to make sure that, hey, if the co-op has gone and purchased power for that member who voluntarily joined, the co-op can't be left holding the bag. They're still going to use the distribution system, so they're going to have to pay there. So obviously when you have a board as a regulatory body, I don't think most co-op boards are passing non-bypassable tariffs. I think that's something, that's a commission, that's something we do here. We need to give them the freedom to make sure that folks who are opting out are not damaging those who remain when there have already been investments made on their behalf. I think that it's very careful. I appreciate staff's concern because I think it's very important to do it right. And it's vital that we do it right because these are incredibly important institutions.
No, thank you for that. And I'd agree with that sentiment, and this is something I said before, is we do have an opportunity here in Nevada with what we're looking at, and want to build something that is the gold standard, the Lamborghini, so to speak, or I'd say for my friends at Tesla, the Tesla of the energy markets. And again, the purpose of why I wanted to have these workshops is to flesh some of these out, to make sure that what we build is the best it could possibly be. And so I just want to say I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. Another question I have in looking at the laws of this, and I think, again, the reason that I'm going to ask this is because it goes into what needs to be amended or changed. Is there a hierarchy in terms of priorities of what the goals this ballot initiative is trying to accomplish? Is it trying to accomplish choice as just, with choice comes good and bad. I mean, it just inevitably does. That's life. And with choice there comes, risk and also benefit. Or is it to achieve lower costs? Is it to promote greater renewable energy? I imagine there's an answer that's all of the above, but if there was a hierarchy, would there be one that could be articulated?
Josh Weber, for the record, I may not be the best person to answer this question, but I like the question. I refer back to what Mr. Ross said before the break. I think he pointed out that, he shared that sentiment that markets are markets, they move. And the idea is to create an open market that will deliver the best services and the cheapest services that are economically viable. And, I think it's our belief and the belief of those who drafted the petition that the market is the best engine to make that happen. So the goal is to get to each of those things, and of course to get to the best opportunity for renewable energy, because that's the policy of the state. Well, a market is the platform, we believe, that drives us there the best way. So my sentiment would be all three, but we're talking about what kind of tool allows us to reach those goals.
Could you, would you be able to rank them if it's okay if you say no. I'm just
I would have to say that when we talk about, reliability and being able to get the energy that we need safely and securely, I don't know that that's really one of the three options that you gave me, but, that is key. But I would have to say that, I don't think I could say we don't lower prices or more green energy. I really don't think I can make that call.
No, thank you. Mr. Volz?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for the record, Fred Volz. I'm looking at the Energy Choice Initiative and I'm seeing what it says, and it does very explicitly say every person. It seems like a huge logical leap to then say that we're going to exclude all of a sudden the co-ops, the rural electric companies, and Boulder City from the mix, even though they have a great business model. When the sponsors of the initiative put the language together, it would had seemed appropriate at that time to exclude those, if that's what they really believe is the appropriate thing to do. That didn't happen. And it seems like it's going to be a court challenge if we start excluding groups from the very clear language of this. But I'd like to add two other groups that will be impacted by the potential lack of choice. The first would be people who tend to live in older rental units who have a master meter that the landlord makes the choice of the electric provider and on some basis decides to allocate those utility costs to the tenants. And the other one is something that the PUC is very familiar with, and that's the mobile home parks that are on a master meter. In those situations, for those who aren't familiar with them, and it's typically the older parks, the individual tenants may not have meters for their units. The landlord receives a consolidated bill and splits it up on some basis to the individual tenants. And specifically for the NRS that we're talking about, it would be NRS 704-910, 704-930, 704-940. And those would seem to need some radical changes to reflect this, because basically the people who are affected by that, and it could be in the tens of thousands, if not more, of Nevadans, are not going to have any energy choice. They will be told what the landlord has decided to choose for them, and that's the end of it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Volz. And my understanding from one of your comments was if there was a clear intent to exclude, certain groups from this, why wasn't just stated, comma, excluding, X, Y, and Z? And I do think that's a good question.
Yes, that is my question.
So, thank you.
Josh Weber for the record. I would just comment, because I do hear what Mr. Volz is saying. I do want to point out that there is a difference between excluding and creating tailored re-regulation specifically for certain groups and bodies. So I think it's a great concern, and I just want to be clear that my position isn't exclude, but rather include in an appropriate manner.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Mr. Griffin, thank you for coming to the mic.
Sure, if I could, I thought I owed you a response, I think, to the question on the priorities.
Yes, thank you.
And I apologize, I know, I recall two of the priorities that you referenced, but if the three priorities,
and this isn't just, and you may even be able to communicate to me what the priorities are, even from a list that I don't have, but if there was to rank as far as a goals, for this ballot initiative? Would it be choice, lower costs, or promoting renewable energy?
And for the record, Matt Griffin, I will relate to you, at least from the conversations at the time. Of course, none of these are, I kind of serve as counsel, so they're not my goals, they're just the goals behind the discussions to promote this petition. I view things, I don't know that you can rank them because I don't think they're all mutually exclusive. I think the discussion about this began specifically about choice, and why are we in a system where every 3 years the rates are set by the government when there's so many different types of energy, so many providers out there that can provide it, and in so many other fields, and even in energy and other jurisdictions, choices work so well. So that was one driving force of it. Renewables was also a driving force of it. And renewables, I don't think you can separate from economic development as well. I work at a firm that principally does lobbying, and we have a lot of clients that both exist in the state and are interested in coming to the state, or some that are already in the state and want to expand their presence in the state. And we represent a lot of tech companies. And they're talking about relocating whatever or building whatever in Nevada and bringing so many jobs in Nevada. But they look at energy as being, in a lot of circumstances, a bigger motivating factor and a larger drag on their finances than even HR or personnel does. So there's a lot of decisions being made, as you're aware, about whether to come to Nevada or not to come to Nevada based upon energy. And there was a lot of decisions that were made in the past 3 years that said not to come to Nevada because of energy. So that was another part of the discussion that we had. That also leads to one of the third driving factors, which is jobs. New jobs, whether it be in the energy industry, the renewable industry, or just economic development generally and construction. Those were kind of the three, I would say, policy objectives. That doesn't mean that, of course, and I think the petition reflects it, reliability and cost and all those things are also part of all of that. But those were the kind of, I don't want to use, I'm trying to think of the right word, but those were a lot of the motivators as to when you start thinking about how can we make, how should this be different, those were three of the motivating factors of why it should be different.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. In the area of renewable energy and economic development, that's something I've seen here on my time as chair of the commission, is there's a strong nexus between Nevada being progressive in terms of its technology, renewable energy, clean energy, and job growth, and attracting the kind of businesses we want here in the state. I've seen that firsthand, at least as my time here as chair. And in my mind, though, I wonder, I like the idea of choice, but I don't like the idea of higher bills either. And at least in my own mind, that there's a threshold that the choice is good up to a point, but if it's going to mean my bills are drastically higher, or my neighbor's bills are drastically higher, the choice becomes less important, because truly keeping my monthly bills low is what's most important to me. And I'm just speaking for myself in terms of my own view.
And I, Mr. Chair, I agree 100%. And I think in the nature of, I don't think you can look at it in just the vacuum of an open market versus a monopoly. Because underlying all that is the cost of energy, right? And if we sit here right now, I have no idea what natural gas is going to cost in 2025. Nobody in this room does, right? None of that is foreseeable. But we are of the opinion, at least, that in an open market and competition, at least it's proven and bore out to be true in a lot of other industries, that costs will be lowered. And there's, I know that now we're getting kind of more on the campaign side, and I don't want to advocate or speak specifically about any of that, but you're talking to someone who came into energy 3 years ago and trying to learn it and understand it in the context of this ballot measure. Now, I knew some of it before from clients and all of that, but looking at it from the market versus monopoly perspective, and I've seen studies that say yes or no, higher, lower. I think at this point, understanding what is going to happen to bills, I think history tells us open markets drive down prices because you have to compete against prices against somebody else. What that specifically will end up being, I think, is the chapter to be written, because we got to know what the legislative policies are going to be if this passes. So I don't think, I view this as more of, it's not an apples to apples discussion. It's more of a, there are so many factors that go into it. I think we all agree that prices are down. Nobody from the folks I work want prices to rise, and we'll do everything to advocate that they stay as low as humanly possible. And I think it's just a difference of philosophy of whether the market provides the best avenue to that or the current system does. And I'll leave it at that, because I know these are questions that exist outside of this room.
No, I immensely appreciate the candor in that answer. And again, one of the reasons the workshops that I hope to kind of flesh out on the record is, if this passes, you know, we have a legislative session that happens around this time next year, and want to be able to hit the ground running and to really have that vision of what the state is looking to achieve, looking to accomplish, because that goes into what laws and BDRs, as you know, are crafted. And if we're leaving what we know behind and sailing the ship towards a new destination, want to make sure we really have as much as possible an idea of what that looks like. And I can say this, I've said this in private conversations, and I say it publicly as well. I don't think the Public Utilities Commission as an agency should ever be afraid of change, or afraid to change, afraid to reimagine itself, afraid to do something new and do something different. As the chairman of this agency, I don't think that's something for me that seems exciting and is an opportunity to build something new. Some folks, when you leave or step aside from the status quo, it makes them nervous. I'm not that kind of person. I want to embrace change and embrace new ways of thinking. Just want to make sure that we're doing it as smart as we can.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And if I could just have one last thought.
Sure, go ahead. This is for a conversation, so go ahead.
It has not been asked yet, but when you're talking about it, reminded me just to point out, and I'm sure the commission staff has looked at it, but in paragraph 3, talks about the implementation timeline. That is, for your consideration going forward, it's intentionally allowed to, whether this commission recommends the legislature or what the legislature decides to do, that it doesn't have to be a flip the switch in February 2019 and we've transitioned out everybody in all areas of the state and all. It can be phased in over a certain period of time. That's what that section's designed to do, just so that you're aware as you analyze this going forward, that to the extent there is a law, whatever, NRSX, NRSX, even after the passage of this petition, is in effect until the legislature affirmatively repeals NRSX. So it's designed to say that, unlike a lot of measures, this goes into effect and everybody has the right, but the right doesn't have to be effectuated until July 2023. And the legislature can open the market under Section 3 either all at once or as they have 3 sessions to look at it. So.
And as I know, you know, and a lot of folks in this room know, or who may be listening know, those legislative session times there's a lot going on. And energy is just one of the issues among many that the legislature is dealing with, and want to make sure again that kind of we have the ducks in a row as much as we can to make sure that legislature is able to make the best use of all of the resources available to them. With respect, as you brought up, the phasing in, that's something I know that Lieutenant Governor mentioned in the Governor's Committee on Energy Choice about the possibility of a staggered, phased-in approach to this. And again, my reading of this is the same, I think, as your intent and your language, is that legislature, as soon as next spring, could enact laws to start phasing in at least some areas, some test areas, some variation of this. which in my mind makes sense. Is that your understanding, or is that the intent of the drafters as well?
It goes, Mr. Chairman, for the record, Matt Griffin, it goes to our earlier discussion, which is the legislature will retain authority over how they do this, and in this paragraph, when they do this. They have a hard backstop of 2023, but just hearing the discussion, if certain issues or regions or users or customers might need a longer look, or might be for whatever reason decided, let's do this first and then we'll do this later. They certainly have the authority to do that under Section 3. Because it's designed to say, for example, if you want to say, take your example of using a test case to go out, that when you're drafting this, it was of great concern that if they decided to do that, or they decided to say large users or small users or whatever the case might be, that everything else stays in place, that the structure we have right now stays in place until the legislature specifically acts on it. So it does give them the flexibility, as you're saying, to either do a region, types of users, a test case, whatever they want to do, they have the ability to do that in a phased-in manner.
Have you had any conversations or heard from any regions in the state who are interested in being that test area?
No, I don't know that I've ever envisioned there being a test area. To be
Okay.
honest, outside of your comment today, I haven't had those discussions. I think to some extent, under 704B, we do have at least a lot of lessons learned, and I think a lot of the 704B customers can provide some insight as to open markets and some of the do's and don'ts, at least for similar type circumstances. But I haven't envisioned a test case or a test region or consumer or anything like that. So I wouldn't know.
And I don't even know if it's possible to do it with that regard, or at least to any effect, but was just just wondering out loud.
Sure.
Mr. Ross? Again.
Ned Ross for RISA. Again, we're kind of touching on the tips of the weeds here a little bit, but it may be more difficult to have a test market, a really small market. I don't think we'd be interested in building systems, for example, to bill a group of customers. It would be expensive.
Okay.
If we don't know we're going to roll it out. I think what might make more sense is you roll out your wholesale trading platform, the place where we can go and purchase power readily and exchange power, out-of-state power, in-state power, set that up and get that working, and then roll competition on top of that and have a phased approach with the utilities so that they can phase themselves out. That may make more sense, but that again, that's in the weeds, and that's stuff we can talk about down the road. The other question that was a little weedy was the master meter issue, and we have that in other states. Have a lot of apartment complexes where you have a master meter and a number of tenants are all served by basically the landlord's power bill. And those are contractual issues between the tenants and the landlord, and they are today with the utility. They pay some fraction of the bill, or if each unit may have a meter, but not a utility meter. That is, the utility meter is on the building, but the landlord has sub-metered all the apartments and actually measured out how much they're using and billing through. The landlord may have that contractual relationship to pick a provider, and then the tenants would pay a share based on their usage. So there's a lot of scenarios there. That's why I say it's in the weeds, but we've dealt with all that. We've dealt with the trailer parks. We've dealt with consumer protections for the elderly, the disabled, critical care. All those things have been contemplated in the rules. I can put you chapter and verse into each of those in multiple states, and you all can pick the best set of rules that are already out there. There's no need to rewrite all that.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Volz?
Yes, Chairman. First of all, what the gentleman was just saying about choice and it's already been dealt with, that still doesn't get back to the basic question of every person getting the right, which is what this initiative says, to choose. They are not able to do that if the landlord is making that choice. But I think the more important issue goes back to let's see, what was I going to say here? Well, on the mobile home parks and the, oh, no, there's something else here. That's right, I'll just save it for another time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. One final question I wanted to ask him, and then we'll break for lunch, is what impact, legal impact would this ballot initiative have on the NRS 704B customers that have already departed? Would it have any, effect on them as they've already left the system, other than, again, the distribution component, the transmission component? Sometimes I look at this in my mind as, is this one big 704B application for the whole state put into the Constitution? And it's one way that this seems, and so that's something, at least that's out there, that I'm wondering. And I know it's a sensitive topic. And not asking that to get into any kind of legal discussions with respect to litigation or anything of that sort. But is there an implication with respect to the handful of businesses that have already left our current regulatory paradigm? Mr. Weber, thank you for coming up.
Josh Weber, for the record, that is kind of a difficult one to touch on day one, so I'm a little nervous to jump in, but I do know, speaking to folks who were involved, clients who were generating the ideas to do this, back when it was first being drafted, one of the important thoughts was, well, you know what, here's these 704B customers, many of whom support the initiative, and they realized just how beneficial being able to access the markets was for them and their companies. They were able to invest more in the state. It was, fantastic opportunities were opened up. And one of their thoughts was, well, we need everybody to have this ability. And that being said, I think that we do in some ways view it as expanding those benefits enjoyed by 704B customers to all the citizens of the state. Now, exactly how that affects 704B customers in their current status, I don't want to get too far into that one until we've talked a bit more about the framework. Certainly they, in many cases paid transition fees, and there were some were contentious, some were settled, so there's a lot of legal issues that could arise, but in the end, yes, it's like a big 704B application for the state is certainly a good way to look at it.
And thank you, and thank you for taking a stab at that answer. Because one thing in my mind is I look at California and how there is a type of an open market, at least for businesses, large-scale businesses in that state, but not necessarily for single-family residential. And so there's in the 704B, because of some of the criteria to qualify as a 704B customer, here in the state of Nevada, we've seen so far just large-scale entities that are going that avenue. And is there anything in this legislation, in your opinion, or this constitutional amendment that would allow for a scenario where some of the larger businesses were able to more readily take advantage of a 704B opportunity without exposing, say, single-family residential customers to some of the concerns of an open market?
Josh Weber, for the record. California is an interesting example. There is direct access for a capped amount of large customers in California. But I was speaking to the president of the California Public Utilities Commission, and he pointed out that while that cap is hit because everybody, lots of people do want to go to the market, and large businesses do hit that cap, and I believe there's bidding involved and so on, a very significant percentage of the folks who are large loads are moving instead to self-generation. So there is actually more energy choice being made by larger customers in California than I think we tend to recognize, because I certainly didn't realize that that much of the load was actively pursuing or already has installed behind the meter generation, be it rooftop solar or larger plants on their large facilities. But at the same time, then you've got the CCA movement, which we haven't touched on, I think, yet today, but is another potential vehicle for people in communities to gather together to get benefits of lower market prices for the individuals within, in California, CCA is a political subdivision, so maybe by county or by city.
What is a CCA?
Community Choice Aggregator.
Got it.
So essentially, a county or city can vote to set up a CCA, and if they do so, then they initially move, everybody within that subdivision is automatically moved to a new energy provider, which is the CCA. It goes and secures the energy instead of securing it through the utility, but customers have the option to opt out and remain with their utility. So I guess that is to say there are opportunities that we can see in other states, and California is an unusual example, and I think that the commission there is a little worried that it's happening unintentionally and they're trying to keep a handle on it. But there are multiple opportunities, many ways that larger customers can access markets more easily. They simply have the ability to, and as you know, my client in this case consists of large customers. That said, I would also point back to the discussion you had with Mr. Griffin about timing. So it certainly is possible that it may be worth looking at phasing how energy choice is offered between the second passage, should it pass, in 2023. And there may be opportunities for certain classes of customers to efficiently move to market quicker. Or it may be geographical areas.
Well, that's actually, I think, a really interesting idea. Instead of looking at a phased-in approach geographically, is there, has there been discussion about whether to do that in terms of customer class?
Josh Weber, for the record, it's certainly, I've heard it discussed a few times. You have to make sure it's done fairly, because if you don't carefully set up the process, then you could end up disadvantaging residential customers. You could think of scenarios where that could happen, and that is absolutely not the intent of the initiative. So yes, that might be an efficient way to do it as long as we do it carefully and right. I kind of sound like a broken record with that phrase.
No, I think that's the. I think everyone who's looking at this issue has that same perspective.
Certainly, it could be an opportunity to roll it out in an orderly fashion.
Is there, for example, if large commercial customers had the opportunity to, take advantage of this, ballot initiative for, say, smaller commercial or residential or multifamily, is there any wisdom in that legally, if looking at a framework or a construct?
Josh Weber, for the record, it seems attractive on the surface in some ways because it would be simpler logistically to roll out in that manner, but I would be very worried, as I mentioned before, about not preserving the benefits for all Nevadans, and that is absolutely the requirement of the initiative. I would also want to look specifically at that question in other states to see if other states have done so, or as Mr. Ross said, maybe it's just better to do it all at once because the companies who want to offer need to set up a large trading floor anyways. So I don't really have a good answer for that. I'd want to look more carefully at previous examples.
Thank you. Mr. Volz.
Yes, Fred Volz again for the record. The point that I wanted to make before was that unlike the other states that have been cited as examples that we can use, we have a constitutional constraint here if this initiative passes a second time. It specifically says what the legislature can and cannot do, and the legislature is supposed to promote energy choice. How we promote choice if we're carving out exemptions to what the voters have supposedly told the legislature they want would seem to be a real legal question that has not been answered yet. And I don't see how we do that legally without, again, some sort of a challenge to that, because clearly the legislature, if it chose to act that way, would not be complying with what the voters said. And if I understand the law correctly, a constitutional amendment trumps any legislation that comes out of the legislature. Thank you.
And I agree with you. The Constitution trumps everything, but the Nevada Constitution trumps everything but the U.S. Constitution. And I think ultimately there'll be 7 folks who will decide any legal challenges, which will be the justices of our Nevada Supreme Court, who interpret our constitutional provisions. So, and I think in one respect, the conversations that we're having here today, or even at the legislature, ultimately don't matter with respect to what the Nevada Supreme Court may ultimately interpret these provisions to mean. But I do think at the same time they're important, because if there is ambiguity in conflicting constitutional provisions, the court may look to a record, look to legislative intent, and to help put those into context. But I don't disagree with you on that.
Well, it just seems as though we could avoid having that whole situation litigated if we didn't have to worry about openly flouting what this constitutional amendment says and calls for. It's very clear the way it's been worded on that particular point.
Thank you. Yeah. Some people are just predisposed to sue. There's litigation in all kinds of things. I think at the end of the day is whether it has any merit or not. With that, I'm going to take a lunch break. When I come back after lunch, I would like to open up the microphones to hear any comments regarding so far the questions that have been asked, the dialogue that has occurred, and would ask any speakers limit their comments to 3 minutes. And so we'll do that when we come back after the lunch break. We'll resume this workshop at 1:30. Thank you.
So